Hey everyone! I recently made a video about the least visible returnees in North American Big Brother, and now I'm making the second part of the series, where I am now covering the most visible returnees in North American Big Brother. Like the last video, I am basing this off the diary room median, based on the average amount they would get per week. The people who are in this picture are currently honorable mentions, and would have been on the list if the video was longer than covering the top 10. At number 10 is Janelle from Big Brother 7 with a 6.56 median. It really should not be any shock that she's on the list, but I was expecting her to be a bit higher. Janelle won the most competitions on the season, so that automatically means a lot of screen time for her. She was also a huge favorite at the time of the season, and even her last season before this one, where she was visible but not the most visible on PP6. With Janelle's witty and sassy personality, in addition to being in her prime during the season, she was always going to be very visible. I also think that with half of the women going out very early in the season, it just meant that she was going to get even more screen time, since there was always a gender imbalance with this distribution. At 9 is Mike Boogie from Big Brother 14 with a 6.58 median. Honestly, I wasn't expecting this rendition of Mike Boogie to be on the list. I do remember him being pretty visible on the season, but not big enough to be one of the most visible returnees, especially since Dan was on the season and Boogie only lasted about halfway. I think that because his presence alone always causes a lot of controversy, no matter what season he was on, he was always going to be very visible. And even in his first season, where he was an early boot, he was very visible as well. I think production likes his diary rooms, and he appeared to be a bit more mature, emphasis on a bit, than his prior renditions, and was the most determined in being a coach, so they wanted to use him to focus on that narrative. Him also being associated with the most visible newbie in Frank also helped him too. Continuing into Big Brother 14, at number 8 is Dan with a 6.8 median. Dan being on the list doesn't surprise me at all, as he was the most visible person on BB10 even when he wasn't relevant in the early weeks of that season, and he knows how to produce himself for the show, though he does yell at the diary room a lot, especially in this season. With him being a returnee and a coach on top of it, they are always going to use Dan to become the main narrator. And once he did become an official player in the fourth week, he really started turning up the antics, and everything strategically started to revolve around him, to the point where it was the Dan show. And everyone else were either co-stars or guests. I just thought he would be higher on the list. I don't know if it's due to the other seasons maybe having more diary rooms in general, bumping up the diary room averages for some of the other people to be higher, just due to how they were distributed in their seasons, maybe. At number 7 is Devon from Big Brother 18, who has a 6.86 median. So this next edition is proof that visibility is not all about having power, as in being HOH or being in the majority alliance, or lacking in power, being an underdog or being consistently nominated. Devon in this season was only nominated twice and never won a single competition, but is one of the more visible people on their season and one of the most visible returnees in general. It isn't shocking, since she was one of the more visible people on her original season, despite being 16th place and the second boot, and she was clearly brought back here so she could be a narrator and be heavily involved in drama. Devon filled her role on both ends, and she often got coverage and narration for things that she really had nothing to do with in reality, and she was more visible than the returnees who made it all the way to the end of BB18. They went out of their way to give her visibility and coverage even when they didn't need to, so it really wasn't necessary. At number 6 is Mike Boogie from Big Brother 7, who has a 6.93 median. Since I talked about one of his renditions as the returnee, I might as well talk about the other one as well, especially since it is a lot more notable. Boogie was definitely a questionable choice for an all-star position, but he got on and he definitely took advantage of the opportunity. It's clear that a lot of his visibility was due to dominating the game with his lines from essentially the very beginning to the very end, and the several diary rooms that he shared with Will, where they are just making fun of everyone and controlling the narrative, plays a huge part in it. Boogie did get involved in the little drama that there was in the season, and he really had a quote unquote learn from his master arc. And like I mentioned before, he got quite a lot of DRs and visibility even in BB2, despite being an early boot, so that would just continue here, since he lasts until the end of the season here. At number 5 is Danielle, who has a 6.95 median. This isn't shocking at all that the queen of diary rooms, yes, it is her and not Brittany, is on the list, even as her rendition as a returnee. She easily had the most diary rooms in Big Brother 3 by a large margin, and while it was partially due to her dominant gameplay, it was also due to her charm, banter, and great narration. In BB7, they continued using her as a narration confessional focus, even with Will on the season, and even during the weeks where she wasn't relevant in the narrative, they went out of their way to show her and to let her tell her perspective. It also helps that she was more emotional and vulnerable in this season, so she was able to be visible in a different way compared to her first season. No matter where her placement was, Danielle was always going to be very visible. At number 4 is Rachel, who has a 7.38 median. Once again, nothing shocking about Rachel being on the list. I think she was the most visible, or close to being so, in her first season, despite being the juror boot. So of course during the season, where she not only makes it to the end, but wins a lot of power, Rachel was going to get a lot of coverage. While Rachel is not the wittiest person, her big personality speaks for itself, and she is always so expressive and transparent about how she feels, so it's a goldmine for the producers. She is always going to get into fights, whether it's with her allies, her fiancé, or her enemies, and she delivered a lot of drama in the season. Also, she was not as obnoxious as she was in her original season, though it was due to the backlash she got in between seasons, but she didn't restrain herself like Cindy did in BB Can, where it caused the latter to be invisible. She's pretty self-explanatory in my opinion. So, there is a tie here for a third/second, so I'm going to talk about the one who is an earlier boot, as the next person is Alison, who has an 8 median with someone else. I remember mentioning in the last video that being the first boot was not a rationale for Keisha's low visibility, and Alison is proof of that, as she still had very high visibility, despite being the first boot. Just like I mentioned how low visibility isn't guaranteed for a first boot, high visibility isn't guaranteed for a first boot either. Alison definitely flamed out due to her own actions and not being able to retain herself, which she promised to do entering the season. Despite being the first boot, I do believe she would have gotten a lot of visibility and screen time no matter where she placed, and I have her BB4 performance to prove this as a reference, since she was always involved in some mess, whether it's drama or strategy, and she's always been excellent at diary rooms. The other person who is involved in this tie with an 8 median is Jeff. Jeff being on this list doesn't shock me, though I didn't think he would be tied for second or third place. Well, Jeff was the favorite of Big Brother 11, to the point that he was given a power-altering power/twist, so he was always going to be put in a higher position in production's eyes. I guess compared to Jordan, he is more dynamic since he is smarter and always gets into drama, though he's never been good in the diary rooms, in my opinion. Regarding his returnee season, he was the one to beat, and a lot of the house catered to him, so that isn't surprising. Also, he is the only person that was asked to go back in the house to do diary rooms after he was evicted. Of course, that was due to all the mess that happened in the double that led to his demise. Baby 13 was Jeff's season to lose, and he lost. But I guess he got the consolation prize of being America's favorite house guest twice. At number 1 is Will, who has an 8.19 median. I knew going into this that it was either going to be him or Dan who was going to take the number 1 spot. And when Dan fell short, it was clear that Will was going to be it. As we have seen on both seasons, he doesn't need to win a competition that would give him power to be involved in strategic ways, or to have a bigger role on the televised episodes. He always has been great in the diary room because he knew how to work the camera without coming up with a fake personality or yelling in it. He has a way with words and a sense of charm and personality while bringing out the best in several people. In this season, he also controlled everything strategically from the beginning to his eviction at the Final Four, and he always has his funny moments throughout the season as well. Him being the most visible BB returnee isn't surprising. So that is the list of the 10 most visible returnees. Here is the list of how I ranked the returnees based off the criteria that I set from both franchises. I am probably going to do this for every season of BBUS and BB Can. Heck, maybe even the Celebrity Big Brother and Over the Top seasons just to see who comes out on top, who comes out on the bottom, and who production clearly preferred. Thank you all for watching.